Nevermore is a unique band from Seattle, Washington, formed in 1992 that plays a blend of progressive thrashy power metal that became very popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. Over the years, the band has released 7 studio albums as well as a smattering of EPs, demos, and live albums. They officially disbanded in 2011, followed by the passing of singer Warrel Dane in 2017. The band looked to be all but extinct until in late 2024 when the longtime guitarist Jeff Loomis and drummer Van Williams announced the reformation of the band, which would launch a worldwide search for a new singer and second guitarist in early 2025, and see them scheduled for major festival appearances in 2026. But before we get too into what the band is up to now, I'd like to take a moment to see where the band came from. Any discussion of Nevermore would be incomplete without first mentioning the predecessor band Sanctuary, which was formed in 1985 by cousins and guitarists Lenny Rutledge and Sean Blossel. Soon after, Warrel Dane would join on vocals as well as Jim Shepard on bass, and the band would set off to record a demo, which was then presented to Dave Mustaine at a concert Megadeth was playing in Seattle with King Diamond. Quote, I told the guys, I'm going to go there and there's going to be a Megadeth King Diamond concert here. And I went and I tried to find Dave Mustaine. I walked every floor until I heard the door open. It was his room, so we kind of pushed our way into the room. I convinced him, we talked for a while, and convinced him to come to our car and listen to the demo. After Mustaine heard the band's demo and was impressed, he promised he would produce the band's first album, Refuge Denied, which he did, and the album was promptly released on Epic Records in 1988. After extensive touring, the band released a power metal classic, Into the Mirror Black, in 1990, and received moderate success, having a video for Future Tense garnering airplay on Headbangers Ball. It is during this time, in late 1990, early 1991, that Jeff Loomis joins the band. After this, the band released a live album, Into the Mirror Live, but then, being on a major label and being from Seattle in 1992, the band was under massive pressure from the label to assimilate into the grunge movement and de-powerfy their sound. Warrel Dane explains, I thought that would be a betrayal to Sanctuary fans because they would have seen it for what it was, which was a sellout. A couple of us were good friends with the guys in Alice in Chains, and we came home from tour and suddenly some of our friends were rock stars. That had a lot of impact mentally on some of the guys in the band. They thought, we want to be rock stars too. Also quoting Warrel Dane, we had a huge fist fight. I got a broken knuckle. See that right there? Shows me his hand. I got that from punching my guitar player in the face. He told me, F you, I am Sanctuary. I make all the decisions, and I just went BAM! After this, Sanctuary disbanded, but Warrel Dane and bassist Jim Shepard came together to form Nevermore, with their original drummer Mark Arrington and also Jeff Loomis on guitars. With this lineup, they recorded a demo entitled Utopia in 1990, which was later released under the Nevermore name, and several more between 1991 to 1995. According to Warrel Dane, the members of the band, besides Mark Arrington, were still under contract to Epic Records at this time, which they sent tons of demos, but were being continually rebuffed and told their sound, quote, needed to be grungier. It's unclear exactly when, but at some point, possibly in 1994, they were released from this contract and signed with German underground metal label Century Media. In 1994, Van Williams replaced Mark Arrington, but not before the two would split the drumming duties on the band's self-titled debut, with Arrington appearing on the tracks What Tomorrow Knows, Garden of Grey, The Hurting Words, and God Money. Here's a quote from Century Media's Bandcamp page. This release was not intended to be a debut album, but the band had recorded 2 separate demo sessions with producer Neil Kernan, who also produced the likes of Queensryche's Rage for Order. Tracks were chosen from the 2 demo tapes, resequenced and remastered, and released as the band's debut offering in early 1995. After this, Pat O'Brien joined on guitar and played on the next 2 releases. In Memory and Politics of Ecstasy before joining Cannibal Corpse for a long run. It was during the In Memory and Politics era where the band really started to solidify their sound as an aggressive form of technical down-tuned thrash. The In Memory EP was released on July 23, 1996, and was seen as a sort of stopgap release between the debut and Politics, which was yet to be finished. Here's a quote from Warrel Dane on the EP and how it was recorded. When we were preparing to do the Politics of Ecstasy, we realized there was going to be a gap between records, and one of the ideas that we had was to use some of these old songs that we didn't have enough money to record at the time. We thought they were too good to not release. That's why we put that out. I think that's one of my favorite Nevermore albums, although the mastering that was done in Germany ruined the sound quality, I think. We recorded it at the same time as we recorded Politics, and if you listen to the Politics of Ecstasy, sonically, those two records are really very far apart, and all just from mastering. Our producer wasn't there when In Memory was mastered. I think the sound suffered so much from that. I know they're some of my favorite Nevermore songs, and the sound quality just is not up to par on that one. I think anytime an artist isn't present when their music is being done this way, the sound suffers. So according to Warrel Dane here, the In Memory EP and Politics of Ecstasy record were recorded at the same time with the same settings, but the mastering was the difference between the outcome of the two record sounds. Politics was released on November 5th, later in the same year in 1996, and was named after a book by early psychonaut and psychologist Timothy Leary, with the first song, The Seven Tongues of God, being the first chapter in that book. The next year, they toured Europe with Flotsam and Jetsam in support of Iced Earth and toured extensively in the United States and abroad in 1997 and 98. It was in 1998 that former Forbidden guitarist Tim Calvert joined the band upon the departure of Pat O'Brien. They finished 1998 grinding out a long tour for Politics, which ended in the fall when they once again entered Village Studios in Tornillo, Texas to record Dreaming Neon Black. The album once again saw Neil Kernon in the role of producer and was ultimately released on January 26, 1999. About the album's lyrics, Warrel Dane has said, "Well, Dreaming Neon Black is based upon a true life experience for me, for one of my ex-girlfriends that disappeared after joining a religious group. She told me that I was evil and horrible, satanic, all this crap. She disappeared and still the body's never been found. I believe she's dead." That being said, the tone of the music was much darker, yet still very aggressive. Dane is also quoted as saying Dreaming Neon Black never leaves you, an appropriate quote. The album's melancholy feeling lends itself well to the wide variety of musical styles and themes found within, and makes an impression that won't quickly go away. The band toured throughout 1999 and 2000 on the back of this classic and shared tours and bills with such bands as Opeth, Death, Merciful Fate, Iced Earth, and Arch Enemy, while gaining an increasing fan base across Europe and the United States. I managed to see the band at a one-off at my local metal club that year for Dreaming Neon Black, and despite there only being about 50 people in attendance, it was easily one of the most awesome shows I've ever seen. Before the writing sessions began for the next album, the second guitarist Tim Calvert exited the band to pursue a career as a commercial airline pilot, which he did do, as well as becoming an instructor. Tim sadly passed away at the age of 52 in 2018. The band wasn't content to take a break, so not even 2 years later, on October 17, 2000, they dropped what many consider to be the most classic and penultimate Nevermore release, Dead Heart in a Dead World. This album was the first to be produced by Andy Sneap, and also the first album to feature the band playing 7-string guitars. The band was seemingly at its peak during this record, musically and lyrically, with songs having multiple hooks. It's an incredibly catchy and memorable album. The song The River Dragon Has Come was written about the Bangkok Dam failure that happened in 1975 in China, which had an estimated toll of 26 to 240,000 lives lost when 62 dams failed. This album charted in Germany, Austria, and Finland, and also on the USA Heat Seekers chart, generally being considered the band's breakout release commercially. They toured the US and Europe extensively with In Flames, Shadows Fall, Dark Tranquillity, Nightwish, Lacuna Coil, and Therion. The next album was entitled Enemies of Reality and was released on July 29, 2003. The album's initial mix was produced by Kelly Gray, who had credits on albums by Candlebox and Dokken, and it suffered greatly, being a flat and muddy mess of a recording compared to Nevermore's razor-precise and crushing low-end production in the past. Here are some quotes from the band on this. "We were at the end of our recording contract with Century Media, and basically they didn't know if we were going to re-sign with them, so they gave us a very small budget for our last album to work with. That was about $20,000, which is a nothing deal to do a record. What we needed to do at the time was to find a producer that was immediately available to make a record with such a small budget, and that guy was Kelly Gray. Unfortunately, he was just not the right guy to do this album. The remix of the album obviously sounds better, but to me, that's the really odd thing about the album. I find it really strange that the production on the album got reviewed more than the songs did. I agree with Warrel Dane here, not much is said about the songs, and to be honest, I remember that it didn't sound great, but further than that, I just remember this album not being very hook-oriented and not sounding a lot like Nevermore. I went back and listened to this album again before I made this video, and much to my surprise found that the band had issued a remix with Andy Sneap, who produced Dead Heart, and this remix sounds much better and takes the songs and elevates them to the level they were initially meant to be heard at. This album could use a second listen from longtime fans who might have written this one off a bit too early like me. In 2004, the band, who had been a four-piece since the departure of Tim Calvert, decided to recruit guitarist Steve Smith, who was at the time a member of Testament, and he contributed to the writing of the band's next album, which is a modern classic and a huge return to form, This Godless Endeavor, which was released on July 26, 2005. This album took Nevermore to another level and is a real ripper, just encapsulating everything Nevermore does really well in one album. The opener, Born, starts with an awesome death metal riff and just smacks you over and over again with memorable riff after memorable riff, and the vocals are also extremely varied and hook-oriented. I'm usually personally torn between This Godless Endeavor and Politics of Ecstasy for my personal favorite Nevermore album. The album was also the best-selling Nevermore album to date, moving about 14,000 copies in its first week in the United States. Jeff Loomis said about the record, "After Enemies of Reality, we really needed to redeem ourselves. We put our heads together and everyone contributed to the songwriting. It harkens back to Politics of Ecstasy." The band hit the road on the Gigantour in summer 2005, which featured Megadeth and Dream Theater, and went on several headlining runs in Europe and North America in 2005 and 2006. In late 2006, Steve Smith had to step away from the band due to kidney failure, for which he needed a transplant that he ultimately received on December 12, 2006. Nevertheless, he officially left the band in 2007, and Jeff Loomis has been the sole guitarist ever since. The band started a long break in 2007, with reasons being Jeff Loomis and Warrel Dane began focusing on solo material. Band members complained publicly and privately that Nevermore was becoming dysfunctional. Multiple interviews from the period quote Jeff Loomis and Warrel Dane saying the band was not writing and wasn't, quote, sure where the next album was going. Warrel Dane recorded a solo record with Jeff Loomis in 2008 and released Praises to the War Machine on April 25th and toured behind it that spring and summer. In 2009, the band reconvened and started writing for the next, as of now, last album entitled The Obsidian Conspiracy. Here's some quotes from the album. "I think this album is a little more straightforward. There's not as many incredibly technical songs. We didn't want to repeat ourselves. I really wanted the songs to be more focused. It wasn't just about being flashy, it was about the song. This one has a lot more groove to it. We didn't want to make another This Godless Endeavor. That album was its own monster." So the band released the album on June 8, 2010, and it was a much different album than This Godless Endeavor, slowing down quite a bit and having less riff-packed songs. Loomis and Dane seem to be consciously trying to make a more straightforward and simpler album on this one too, but that's where I think this one suffers a bit. One of my favorite things about Nevermore is their ability to cram as many interesting riffs on one album as possible. Nevermore did tour for the Obsidian Conspiracy, playing smaller European headlining run and a handful of North American dates through 2010, but the tour was brief and noticeably less intense compared to their earlier cycles. In April of 2011, both Jeff Loomis and Van Williams announced their departure on the same day, citing communication problems, internal conflict, and musical differences. That moment effectively ended Nevermore, as the remaining members never continued under the same name. On December 13, 2017, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Warrel Dane passed away of a heart attack. He was 56. Many fans like myself thought this would mark the end for the band, as did Jeff Loomis. Quote, "Without Warrel, it's just not feasible in my mind." Another quote, "It's a sad situation with one of my best friends that I grew up being in a band with. He was one of the best lyricists in metal, I believe, that is ever out there. He was a wonderful human being." However, in 2024, Van and Jeff jointly announced via social media the resurrection of the band, minus Jim Shepard, who is considering himself retired at this point. The band then went on a worldwide search for a new singer and second guitarist. Then in March, we got an update. The wait is over. We are beyond excited to announce that after an incredible audition process, we've assembled a lineup that honors our legacy while forging a new path forward. As of the production of this video in November of 2025, the new lineup isn't announced yet, but they are confirmed for a few festivals in 2026 and have hinted at playing new material. Thanks so much for watching, and subscribe for more Metal Tales.